Today, I'm going to walk you through 3 winning LinkedIn content types specifically for B2B SaaS founders. I'm going to give you the exact templates that you could use to replicate these posts in your own strategy, and I'll show you real life examples so you can see how these post concepts look in application. Now, why should you listen to me on this, and who am I to talk about this subject? So I run Compound. It's a B2B content agency where we help SaaS founders with their LinkedIn content, and we post about 150, probably 200 plus content assets per week at this point. So I have a lot of visibility into what's working now, content formats that hit, content topics that hit, and just overall what's working on the platform. So again, by the end of this video, you'll have exactly what you need to implement these 3 content formats into your strategy. It's not a whole strategy, but I can promise you that if you do these well, you should see an improvement in impressions and also, more importantly, be building a relevant audience who's actually going to buy your stuff. Now, as far as the first content template that I have for you, it's going to be a company update post. This is a tried and true format that works, that you can repeat on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, at the half year mark, at the end of year mark. These update style of posts tend to perform really well, and I'll get into the reasons why in a second, but the cadence that I would operate at here is probably once a month, unless you're full on going like the building in public route, which there are pros and cons to that. I have a full video on my channel detailing that strategy in depth, but you're probably not going to go the full on like building in public, sharing everything route that some people do. So if that's the case and you're just kind of doing these periodic updates, I would go once a month. That's the cadence that we run with the vast majority of our clients. And then at the end of a quarter, we'll also do a company update post. Now, the reason why these work so well is they're great for establishing momentum and showing that, hey, this company is growing. We're doing a lot of cool things. We're making these hires. We're launching these features. We've just launched these customer logos. We got these case studies. They're all things that give this aura of momentum around your company, which is one, great for attracting customers. If customers see that, hey, this company in my category is using this product, I should probably consider it. Or when I need a product in this category, this company is going to be the first one that I come to because I see that, hey, this competitor of ours is using this very well. It's great for attracting investors if you're a VC-backed company and you're looking to raise a seed round or a Series A, or if you're even a Series B. If you're able to show that your company has a lot of momentum on social, it's going to be a lot easier to build hype during your fundraise. And then also, we all know that talent in recruiting is a major part of growing your startup. I'm dealing with it right now at my agency. I'm trying to figure out this hiring thing, and we're getting better at it. But one of the things that helps us a lot and has helped a lot of other companies is being able to show candidates like, hey, there's a lot of really cool stuff going on here. There's a lot of growth going on here. And if you get in right now, you're going to have a great opportunity for growth in your own individual career. So having these regular company updates kind of kills 3 birds with one stone. You can attract more customers, you can attract investors and build social proof with them, and you can attract higher quality talent. The interesting thing about company update posts is they're also one of the few bottom of funnel post types that actually performs quite well on LinkedIn. So a lot of bottom of funnel content like product updates and feature highlights and case studies, they can perform well, but most of the time they just don't have as large of an audience. So they don't really get the same number of impressions or engagements as another top of funnel like founder story type of post would. But with company updates, we do see them perform quite well. And the reason for this is you want to position your company updates as a milestone. You don't want to position it as a sales pitch. Milestone, not sales pitch. And the template I have laid out here will make this make a lot more sense. So there's a few key sections of this type of post that you want to nail. The first one is going to be the hook, and I'll get into that in a bit more detail in a second. The second is going to be the win section, so outlining 3 to 5 wins from the past month. Third is going to be the learning section, so after the wins, you transition into, okay, here's what we learned. Again, 3 to 5 bulleted things. After that, you transition into what's next, so what's next on the roadmap in the coming month or coming quarter, and then finish it off with a CTA. Again, the reason why these work so well is that you're positioning it as a milestone, and LinkedIn loves milestones. So think about whenever someone announces a new job, like, I'm humbled and honored to accept this new position at this random company that nobody's ever heard of. But LinkedIn will eat that up and people just comment like, congrats and well done and stuff like that. We tap into the same sort of dynamic when we share these company update style of posts. And this specific structure of hook, wins, learnings, what's next, call to action, taps into this. Now, getting into the hooks in particular, this is the most important part of the post. As always, if we don't nail the hook, no one's going to read the rest of the post. And like I was just saying, the hooks for company update posts tend to perform best when they're framed as milestones. Because when it's framed as a milestone of like, hey, we achieved this great growth metric in this month, or we achieved this milestone in this month, people, one, want to congratulate you, but two, it also gives you credibility. It's like, oh, this person's company grew 30% month over month. I should probably listen to what they have to say. Or, oh, this person's company just passed 5 million in ARR. I should probably listen to what this person has to say. And with the hook in particular, you'll want to use a very specific growth metric in the hook to establish credibility. Generally, the metric that I see perform best here is something around percentage of top line growth, or if you're open to it, sharing like ARR milestones. Now, a lot of the founders I talk to don't really want to share their revenue publicly. That's more of a personal preference. Again, are you doing this building in public thing or are you not? It's totally fine either way. If you're not going to share your revenue publicly, which the majority of the founders we work with don't, I would lean into percentage of top line growth if you're comfortable with that. And if even that is a little bit too revealing for you, that's totally fine. But the key is you want to find some sort of metric. So it kind of goes, revenue is the gold star of like, hey, this is probably going to perform best because people just like to see money metrics. The second one that I would use is probably percentage growth. And this is the most common one because again, you're not sharing direct revenue. You're not sharing revenue publicly. And then after that, you can kind of play around with a few different metrics. One other type of metric that I see work well is like total customer count of like, hey, now we're serving 100 plus brands, or now we're serving 200 plus brands. Another metric that I see work pretty well is like headcount growth of like, hey, we went from 5 to 15 employees over the past month, or something like that, or some other proxy for company growth. The key is you want to use a specific metric, and I'll get into the example in a second here, that again gives people a reason to stop scrolling and it's like, oh, this person knows what they're doing. I should listen to what they have to say in this update. And again, it frames it as a milestone. LinkedIn loves that. People are going to congratulate you and start commenting and liking, and we can tap into that dynamic that exists on LinkedIn. So as far as a specific template that I like to use for the hook, typically it goes something like this. So it's like June was a great month for company. ARR grew by 20% month over month. So growth metric grew by X% month over month. And then you'll want to have some sort of bridge line, like here's what we learned, or here were the wins, learnings, and what's next, or something like that. I'll get into the example I have in a second here. But the template again is month was a great month for company, growth metric increased by X%, and then some sort of transition line or bridge line into the win section. Now, the win section is pretty self-explanatory. You'll want to share 3 to 5 specific wins from that time period. So if we're doing a monthly company update, you'll want to share 3 to 5 wins from that month. The best practice here is make them as specific as possible. Again, the more metrics you can share or you're open to sharing, the better. So again, if you can say like headcount went from 5 to 15 in the past month and we made these new hires, that'll work really well. Or we launched 17 new features in the past month. That would be an insane amount, but you launched X amount of new features in the past month. Again, the more specific you can get, the better. Also, a good easy one to do in the win section is tagging any new hires, because then they're going to engage with the post, comment, and increase the distribution of it. You can just format this in a bulleted list or a numbered list, whatever you want. You don't really need to make it a narrative, so it doesn't have to flow super nicely. You can just make it a super simple bulleted list. Again, I'll show you the example in a second here. And just like you'll want to tag any new hires, you'll also want to tag any new customers and specifically people on their team that helps you get the deal across the line. Because like if you tag some massive corporate account, they're probably not going to engage with it. But if you tag the corporate account and you also tag the partner manager that helped you close the deal or helped you with, or was your point of contact in onboarding, again, personalize the post. They're going to engage and distribute it to their audience as well. Now, after the win section, you'll transition into the learning section. Same sort of format, bulleted list of 3 to 5 points. And this is what you learned in the past month or the past quarter or whatever period we're looking back at. So like one example could be a founder who was transitioning out of founder-led sales into building a sales org. They could be sharing a learning about what it took to build out that sales org or a mistake they made or something like that. Or another one could be if a feature launch maybe took a little bit longer than it should have, like what was the learning that came out of that? Or the inverse, like if a feature launch performed way better than you thought it would, what was the learning from that? This is where you can get a bit more tactical. And again, this helps the post feel like it's not just you bragging or sharing milestones, but like, hey, here's what we did really well. And here's exactly what we learned from it. And that's what gives the value to someone who's reading the post. And this is a good opportunity as well, if anything did go wrong, to get a little bit vulnerable or selectively vulnerable. I'm not a believer that you have to share everything on the timeline, especially as it's still going on. So like if you're dealing with investor drama, maybe don't put that in your learning section of your update post as it's still going on. But again, the example I just use is like, hey, if we had this feature launch that went well, it's done, it's all good now, but hey, maybe it took a little bit longer than you expected to get it across the line, you could include something about what you learned from that experience in the learning section, or what you've learned as your team has grown from X to Y amount. But again, not too complex. Now, the CTA, also pretty simple. I'm not gonna spend too much time on this, but the CTA for this type of post is pretty much just to follow along for more company updates or follow along for an inside look at what we're doing to grow your company. If you can make it feel like someone's getting an inside look or a sneak peek or a look behind the curtain, that tends to perform well. Again, this doesn't mean you have to share everything publicly. By leaning into that desire to have like a sneak peek or an exclusive look, that doesn't mean you're committing to building in public. It's just a little tactic you can use to get people more engaged, to get them to want to follow along. Like for example, I'll do these update style posts for Compound every once in a while, and there's a lot of stuff about the agency that I don't share. Like I don't share my revenue numbers. I don't share like specific client stories, especially if there's like an issue or something, which does happen from time to time. Like I'm not gonna go and share that on the timeline. I don't have to commit to building in public and sharing everything with the timeline, but I can selectively share things that help create this perception of momentum around the company. And that's what you wanna do with the style of post. Now, looking at an example here, this is like a quintessential company update style post from Austin Hughes. He's founder or co-founder and CEO at Unify. And this pretty much follows the playbook step by step. So looking at the hook here, April was another massive month across the board at Unify. So again, positioning it as a milestone. We grew ARR another 22% month over month. We're currently up 4.8x from where we started the year. Again, using a growth metric to establish credibility and create curiosity. Like if someone grew 22% month over month, someone sees that, that's a SaaS founder or in SaaS go-to-market, which actually happens to be Unify's ICP. Someone sees that and is like, oh, that's sick. I want to see what they did. And then a bridge line here. So we had some big wins to share as we make our way through May. So this again creates an open loop before the see more button happened on LinkedIn. So we establish credibility, position it as a milestone, and then transition into the next part of the post. And then with the win section, pretty straightforward here. Not a whole lot to call out, but notice how it's in a bulleted list format. In this case, you use the arrows, but you could use bullets or you could use numbers, whatever you want, but just very simple list. It makes it very readable. And also it's easier for you to write because you don't have to think about crafting it into this compelling narrative. And then you can see how he tagged the specific team members. So Skylar was the AE that they onboarded in April. They also tagged Tamim and Garrett. And again, they'll engage and increase the distribution of the post. Now, one thing to call out here is there is no explicit learning section, but if it was going to exist in this post, it would likely go after this bullet before this. So this is very clearly like the what's next or roadmap section. So if he was going to include a learning section in this post, he would include it here, and it would follow a very similar format of just bulleted list, just list out your learnings. So as you can see, not every single component of the template in this post and the other ones we'll discuss need to be in every single variation. You can kind of mix and match, but generally the template is what I would recommend. As far as the what's next section, also pretty straightforward. So just saying what the next month, at this point it was May, what their number one focus is going to be. So you can pause and read through that if you'd like. And then at the end, the CTA here, because they were hiring for AEs at the time, is more for AEs to slide in the DMs or for people to send intros to AEs that are looking for work at the moment. So just not necessarily like the follow along for more. But again, another example of how you can tailor the CTA to be specific to what you need for your company. So if you're looking to hire for a specific role, the company update style of posts are a great opportunity to plug that in. If you don't have a very specific ask that you want to make, I would just lean on the, hey, follow along for more of an inside look on how we're building XYZ company. Now, the next style of post that I want to go over, the next template I have for you is an industry hot take narrative post. And this is pretty self-explanatory. We want to share a hot take about the category that you operate in. And specifically, this should be targeted towards your ICPs. So again, if you're in B2B sales and that's who you sell into for your SaaS company, you're not going to want to make a hot take about direct to consumer or e-commerce. Like that might be an okay top of funnel content piece if for whatever reason that fits into like how you think about things or whatever. But if you're looking at being very targeted and you want to make sure you're building a relevant audience, you want to make sure that the hot takes that you have are more specific to your ICP. Now, there are a few different variations or ways to do hot take posts, but the variation I want to go through today is taking the hot take and pairing it with a story or anecdote. So again, the industry hot take narrative post. And you want to take the hot take or the claim that you're making and back it up with an anecdote or with an example, either from your personal experience as a founder or from an anecdote that you heard about a customer or a prospect or a conversation you had at a conference. But you want to back the hot take that that you have up with an example that only you can give. And what this does is it makes the post inherently more compelling, because I could sit here and shout at you that, hey, LinkedIn content is super important because of X, Y, and Z. But if I only say like the how-to or like the generalized thoughts, literally any content agency owner can go and say the same thing and it would be just as compelling. I have no differentiator. But if I tell you, hey, LinkedIn content is important for X, Y, Z reason, I had this client who did X, Y, and Z, and here's a specific example and how they did and how you can too, it inherently makes the post more valuable. And you also have a reason to trust me on this and maybe work specifically with me, because I showed you that, hey, I have this very specific story to back this up and I have a reason to believe this hot take. Now, as far as the template that you can steal, also a pretty simple post format. There's not a whole lot of moving pieces here. At a high level, we have the hook, as we would with any LinkedIn post. You have the anecdote. So what's the story or example that you're going to share? That's the second section. You'll have the takeaways. So once you share the anecdote or example, like what are the key lessons that came out of that, or the lesson that came out of that? And then last, you'll have the conclusion or call to action. So you'll have 4 sections here: hook, anecdote, takeaways, call to action. I'll dive into each of those in more depth in a second here, but that's at the high level what that template will look like. Now, as far as the hooks for the style of post, the biggest thing is you want to establish credibility and then position it as a story. So the template that I would use for your hooks for these industry hot take narrative posts is open up with some sort of credibility statement, make your hot take, and then have a bridge line. So credibility statement, the hot take, and then your bridge line. An example of how this would look in real life would be this post from this guy, Josh Payne. He's a founder and investor, previously sold a company called Stack Commerce, scaled that to like 9 figures in revenue, now is building his next thing in Onward. I think he just got that past 5 million in ARR. So he's a killer, also great on LinkedIn. And this post is a great example of the industry hot take narrative. And zooming in on the hook here, we'll see that he starts off with OpenSky is actively funding founders who want to build for a strategic exit in the $50 to $200 million range by raising a few $1 million of equity and then scaling with profitability in mind. So he starts off with this credibility builder that shows like, hey, I'm doing this thing. We've cut some deals already. Like I have experience in this category that I'm going to be speaking to you about. And then after that, he gets into the actual hot take of not every startup needs a $1 billion outcome to be a win. So if he would have just started with not every startup needs a $1 billion outcome to be a win, that post probably could have done okay. And people who know Josh know that he's a killer founder and investor and would probably believe what he has to say about that topic anyway. But if this post branches out and gets attention from a cold audience, that credibility building line gives someone who hasn't heard of Josh and his accomplishments a reason to believe what he's saying or a reason to want to read more. So you have the credibility builder, you have the actual hot take, and then here is the bridge line. Again, the bridge line is what bridges you from the hook into the rest of the post, in this case, into the anecdote. So here's a real example of what that looks like. Pretty straightforward. Now, the next part of a industry hot take narrative post after the hook is the actual narrative. So it's the example or anecdote. And there's 2 ways you could do this. One is going to be through your own personal experience as a founder. So, hey, here's what happened to me to make me believe this. Or here's an example of a customer or a prospect that I spoke to, or just a company I've seen, or an example that I've seen personally that stood out to me as a piece of evidence for this hot take that I'm making. So again, going back to Josh's post, his is an example of the second variation. So using an example of a customer, or not in this case, not a customer, but a portfolio company, taking that hot take and backing it up with that example. So he goes from the hook into this narrative of this company called Levanta, which is a software company who kind of fits the bill of what that hook describes. And I'll let you pause if you want to read through the actual post and see how it flows. But generally, you want to have that narrative or that example be one section of the post. You don't want to transition back and forth from like, here's part of the narrative and then part of the takeaway, part of the narrative, part of the takeaway. It gets very confusing. It's a lot more difficult to write as well. Again, the goal with these templates is to make these post formats as repeatable as possible. Now, after you get through the example or the anecdote, then you'll want to get into the takeaway. So what do we learn from this example or from this story that you shared? And this is what takes the example and ties it into your individual takes as a founder or as an expert in whatever category you operate in, which helps to build credibility and trust between you and your ICP. And it also makes the post valuable to the reader because it's not just saying, hey, here's this thing that happened to me. Cool, that's it. It's like, here's the thing that happened to me. And also here's what you can learn from it and this template or this strategy or this tactic that you can apply in your day-to-day, which further reinforces the idea of you as a go-to resource for your ICP, which will inherently make them want to buy from you when they need something in your category. So perfect example of a middle of funnel piece of content executed to perfection. Generally, you'll want to have between 1 to 5 takeaways for a specific anecdote. I think 5 is probably a bit on the higher end. In most cases, I tend to either go with 1 or 3. So 1 makes it very easy to just work it into the narrative. And then if I go with 3, then what I'll do is like break it up into a bulleted list, like literally saying like, hey, here are the takeaways, 1, 2, 3, boom. So again, if you have multiple takeaways, format these into a numbered or bulleted list. It makes it easier for you to write, kind of like how we were talking about with the company update style of posts just previously. And also it improves the readability for the reader. If someone's reading on social, they might want to read a super quick list versus like a massive narrative. So if we look at this example here, it kind of goes into what this idea of raising less money means for you, the reader, not just using the example from Josh's own life or the example from his portfolio company, and then kind of rounding it out with one simple takeaway of like raising VC isn't one size fits all. So after that anecdote, what does this actually mean for you as the reader if you're a founder looking to raise VC money? And then as always, the last section is the conclusion and CTA. So the biggest thing with the conclusion here is like you want to just bring the post to a nice natural end. A lot of people can struggle with CTA. This is one of the areas I find myself coaching our writers on a ton, because like you don't want to just always end with like an open-ended question to like engagement bait people on LinkedIn. That can kind of work. And I think having a question, so even if we go back to this post, Josh just ends with a question. I think it makes a lot of sense because it's like, hey, he wants to source more potential investment. So if he wants to find other founders that are looking for an outcome like this, asking a question that would attract those founders makes a lot of sense. But you don't have to necessarily force it. Like if we look at this line here, align with investors early on a reasonable valuation, a specific exit timeline, it avoids misalignment while still allowing founders, investors, and buyers to achieve great outcomes together. So this kind of naturally ties up everything that was discussed in this post into a nice soft landing. It doesn't feel abrupt. It doesn't feel forced. And then if you want, like Josh did here, you can add a call to action as a question, or you can just have it end with a nice natural conclusion. But that is the industry hot take narrative post. So see how we introduce a hot take, which makes the hook more polarizing. We have some credibility builder at the top as well to make someone want to read. And then we use a specific example that can only be applied to you that makes the post inherently more compelling, tying that into your takeaways and learnings to build you into a go-to resource for your ICP who's reading this post, and then wrapping it up nicely with a conclusion and maybe a question to get them engaged. Now, before we get into post template number 3, if you're enjoying this training, go ahead and drop a subscribe down below or a like down below, or both, honestly. Subscribe and like if you want to see more of these and also help video reach more B2B founders like yourself. Now, this third post template I have for you, also insanely simple and insanely repeatable. It's a feature list curation template. And the goal here is you want to just list out literally every feature that you've launched in a defined period of time. What I would recommend here is picking, hey, here's every feature we've launched in the past 3 months, or every feature we've launched in the past 6 months, or the past year. You can really do whatever you want. The goal here is you want to display shipping velocity. So you want to give the perception that you're launching all the time, or you're shipping a lot of stuff. And this is great for SaaS founders because you might be shipping a lot of new features that in isolation aren't that big of a deal, or just aren't that compelling for a full social launch. Like you're not launching a brand new product every single week, but you might be launching minor updates and tweaks to the product. And all together, you have like a list of, hey, 25 things that we've launched in the past quarter, or 25 things that we've launched in the past month. That's super compelling and impressive to your audience. And kind of like the company update post, you want to position this post as a milestone, not a sales pitch. So the goal with this post is not to say, hey, here's all the stuff we launched, buy our stuff now. Like we don't want to position it like that. It's more like, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of our team for all the work that they've done to get these features across the line. Here's everything we've launched in the past quarter. And it's a list of like 20 different features, looks super impressive. It's like, whoa, their engineering team was on point, or their product team was on point. And then at the end, there's sort of a nice natural CTA into, hey, if you want to check out what we're doing, here's a link to book a demo. So I'll get into the full template in a second, but that's sort of the overview of what we're trying to do. You want to create this perception of momentum and position the post as a milestone. And again, this gives you an opportunity to do some good product marketing for features that may not have gotten a ton of attention in isolation if you were going to do like an individual feature highlight or a launch around them. So as far as the template, pretty straightforward here. You have your hook, as always, you have your actual feature list, and then you have your call to action. Insanely simple. So as far as the hook, again, you want to frame this as a milestone, not a product show, because again, LinkedIn loves milestones. Think about the guy who just got a consulting gig and is posting, I'm so honored and humbled to accept this position at McKinsey, XYZ, whatever. People eat that up. We can lean into the same sort of dynamic by positioning posts as milestones. So if you're the founder, you want to frame it like you're so proud of the team for shipping all that they have. And odds are you are proud of them, so you're not faking anything. It's just important to consider how you're framing it on LinkedIn. So as far as the template I would use here for the hook, I would do, we shipped X amount of new product features in defined time frame time at company. So an example of this would be, we shipped 20 new product features last quarter at Unify. And next would be, that's a new feature every X days. Insane. So that's a new feature every 4 days. Insane. You don't need that second line, but it kind of adds to the feeling of it being a milestone of like, oh my gosh, they shipped this amount and that's equates to X amount every 4 days. Like that's kind of crazy. Second line would be, I'm so proud of what team members got done in such a short sprint. Here's everything we shipped. So I'm so proud, and then tag your team. And then that bridge line of here's everything we shipped. Pretty straightforward hook format. So seeing how this looked in an actual post for Austin from Unify. Again, we shipped 20 new product features last quarter at Unify. That's a new feature every 4 days. So positioning it as a milestone. You don't need this second line here, but I think it does add to the hook because it increases that feeling of it being an impressive milestone, not just kind of a run of the mill like, hey, we launched 5 features in the past quarter. And then I like how Austin tags his team and again positions it as a milestone. It makes it feel less like a sales pitch and more like a founder shouting out his team, which in this case it is. I'm not saying to like fake that. I'm just saying to position it that way on LinkedIn. And then this bridge line, here's what we ship, is a nice transition into the actual feature list. And then the second part of this post is the actual feature list. This is so straightforward. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but as you can see, you just want to list out all of the features. I would use a numbered list for this, again, to show the amount that you have shipped and increase the perception of like, oh, that's actually a lot. One nice touch here is that if there's specific categories of features that you've launched, you might want to break them up by categories. So like for this example, Austin breaks it up between email deliverability, sequencing, the core product. He could have taken out these sections, but it's kind of like a nice rehook in the middle of the post of like, hey, here's 5 in this category, here's 10 in this category, here's 7 in this category. So something to consider if you're going to do one of these for yourself, but really just list them out. If it's a feature where the name doesn't inherently tell you what it does, maybe give a one-liner of like what the feature actually does. So an example of that is like mailbox creation, create new mailboxes in 2 clicks without needing IT. So name of the feature, quick one-liner, you're good. List them all out in a numbered format, and that's how you do the feature list. Now, as far as the call to action, this is definitely more of a bottom of funnel post type. And one thing we've actually seen work really well. So this post for Austin actually drove quite a few inbound demos with a direct link to book a demo. I don't usually love doing that on LinkedIn because it feels a little bit too sales pitchy, and also LinkedIn doesn't love links, or social platforms in general don't love links. But I think if you're going to do this style of post, it is something worth testing if you want to try to send people directly to your book a demo page. One other wrinkle here is like by doing that, this also puts you in a position where you might be able to test this as like a thought leader ad. I don't think Austin has in this case, but in theory, he could boost this post. And because there's a very direct CTA at the end to book a demo, it would make more sense. So you could try pushing to the book a demo page, or you could just say like, hey, shoot me a DM if you want to learn more about the product. That's also a CTA that I see work pretty well. That doesn't require you to use a link in the actual post. And as far as the media here, what I would do is either, I think this slide came from a deck that they use in a board meeting or an investor pitch or something like that. But you could use a similar graphic where you list out all the features in visual format, or you could do like a team picture, like going back to the company update style of post. I'm having a real life team picture or team photo tends to do pretty well. So if you're kind of framing this as a milestone of, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of this team, you have a picture of that specific team, and real life photos tend to perform quite well on LinkedIn right now. It's one of the media types that we see do best. This really isn't that shocking, but just something to call out. Now, one overarching theme I want to call out here is that these formats are all repeatable. So you could do the company update post every month and never run out of ideas because you're always going to be doing new things month over month. You can do the industry hot take post and either repost the same idea and slightly reformat it, or you could fit different stories or different anecdotes into that format. So you can use it over and over and over again. This isn't something you use once and you're like, okay, I use it once, I'm never going to post it again. And then with the feature list highlight, you can do that once a quarter or once every half a year, or even once a month if you're moving super quickly. But the point here is that you want to find winning formats or winning templates and run them into the ground. A lot of founders have this misconception around post templates or post topics of like, hey, I use this once, I can never use it again. That's a misguided line of thinking. You want to find winning formats and use them until they stop winning. So try these out. If you want more deep dives on B2B social, hit subscribe here. I also have a newsletter where I do written content on like deep dives and playbooks on how B2B SaaS companies can win on LinkedIn and other social platforms. And if you want to see my full playbook for founder-led content, I'll toss the video up on screen right now. So if you enjoyed this, check that out. I think you'll like it, and I'll see you over there.